The objective of this session is to increase awareness of and engagement with the UN decades for people of African descent, the first decade, and a little bit about what has come out of it, to engage with the report that came out early in the first decade, and to consider personal and church responses to the concerns raised in that first report that I hope will bring us to a place of hope. And the guidelines that I like to use, because I have done a lot of work with the Kaleidoscope Institute, are the respectful guidelines. You may be familiar with them. Um, and it used the acronym RESPECT, starting with R. So in the time that we are spending together, we invite you to take responsibility for what you say and feel without blaming others. And this responsibility includes being attentive to how our words might land, and if they land in a way that we didn't intend, to still take responsibility for it. Uh, when I was a child, if I accidentally stepped on my brother's foot, the fact that I didn't intend to hurt him didn't erase my responsibility for the action that caused pain. So, E is to use empathetic listening, and that is bringing our own emotions to our listening in a way that opens rather than closes our ability to listen and to hear. S, oops. S is being sensitive to differences in how people communicate. Some people speak quickly. Some need some silence to gather their thoughts before they speak. Some share smoothly, some pause while talking. We share stories in different ways, and honoring that sensitivity makes more room for all to share. P is to ponder what you hear and feel before you speak. And this also includes this calls for moments of silence at times in the sharing. So sometimes if you're sharing pauses, you might let there be a little bit more silence, especially if there's one or two people in the group that haven't shared yet. E is to examine your own assumptions and perceptions, and especially if there is disagreement or if emotions are high. Oops, sorry. C is to keep confidentiality. And in this time together, I encourage you to honor that other people's stories are theirs. And you are encouraged to, if you are talking about this event, you're encouraged to share how you were impacted by what another said in the small and large group sharing, but please not who they are or what they said. T is to trust ambiguity, because we're not here to debate who is right and who is wrong. And this applies when people are coming from a place of goodwill and honesty. And I trust that everyone here is coming from a place of goodwill and honesty. And then we have genuinely different perceptions of truth. And so a moment that brings you great comfort might be one that brought me great pain. And in the ambiguity, the hope is that we can allow it to be truly both a comforting and a painful moment at the same time. And to remember that my experience or understanding or belief might be different from yours, but it doesn't invalidate yours, and yours doesn't invalidate mine. So, the first United Nations decade for people of African descent was declared by the United Nations And it extended from January of 2015 to December of 2024. Some of you, hopefully many of you, were aware of that decade that just ended in this past December. This decade was a call for people around the world to address issues impacting people of African descent, and seeking recognition, justice, and development for peoples and communities of African descent. It acknowledged that people of African descent, even though diverse, are a distinct group worldwide, and it drew attention to the fact that the human rights of people of African descent must be promoted and protected. The UN Working Group of Experts on people of African descent was a group that made visits to numerous countries, and they visited Canada early in the decade in 2016, and their report came out in 2017. And that report found many positive actions being taken on federal and provincial level already. But they also reported some deep concerns. And so the working group was deeply concerned by the structural racism that lies at the core of many Canadian institutions and the systemic anti-Black racism that continues to have a negative impact on the human rights situation of African Canadians. And they came out with numerous recommendations. In January of 2018, it took Canada until 4 months after the release of this decade, which was 3 years into the decade, to finally sign on to the decade. The Prime Minister endorsed the decade, as I said, in January of 2018. And the government made a number of commitments to improve research and data collection and to increase awareness and address the concerns of Black communities in Canada. And since endorsing the decade in 2018, the Government of Canada has committed up to $872 million to Black-focused initiatives. Some of them are still underway, still being implemented or planned. These range from racial justice to entrepreneurship to economic dignity. And the programs and investments included the Supporting Black Canadian Communities initiative to celebrate and share knowledge and build capacity in Canada's vibrant Black Canadian communities, and funded almost 3,000 projects to grow charities and nonprofit organizations led by Black people to benefit Black communities. There's the Black Entrepreneurship Program to support Black entrepreneurs, the Black-led Philanthropic Endowment Fund, supporting charities and nonprofits that are Black-led, Black-focused, and Black-serving, the development of Canada's Black Justice Strategy to address anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination. And this is still under development. It is in the third, I believe it's third of 4 stages. So it's almost ready to be implemented. The Government of Canada has invested in mental health of Black Canadians, and established the National Institute for People of African Descent. In 2024, the government launched the anti-racism strategy. I went to the first of the workshops that were offered by that, under that program. And in addition, the Government of Canada, unlike a government we know recently making changes, Government of Canada honors Canadians of African descent through its annual Black History Month campaign. And recent events actually make it apparent why it is so important that we do this. And in 2021, the Government of Canada officially recognized August 1st which marks the actual day in 1834 that the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 came into effect across the British Empire. So that is called Emancipation Day, and it is one that Black communities in Canada have been celebrating since 1834. So it is a long time coming. Um, in So I share all that to have a lot of good news in your minds and in your heart. You're going to be looking at some really bad news in your breakout groups. It's not all bad news. Canada is doing work, but there is more work to be done. And all of the concerns that I have shared with you, will be sharing with you from the 2017 report, continue to be concerns now. Um, So in 2024, during the last year of the decade, Canada actually co-sponsored a proposal for a second international decade for people of African descent. So there was recognition that we needed more time worldwide and in our country to work on this. And so that was put in place in December of 2024 by the United Nations and was adopted on December 17th by Canada. And this decade that we are now in and just beginning will go from January 2025 to December 2034. And my hope is that in the breakout groups, you will have a chance to just get started thinking about what you might do in your communities. You will not come out with fully formed ideas. You might not even come out with what you feel like is a good idea, but hopefully you will come out with with the motivation, the inspiration to go and find activities to engage in the next 10 years. And just faithful response can be quite broad. So, it could be an action. It could be a prayer. It could be a scripture passage. Your faithful response can be wherever the Spirit moving in the group leads you to go. So it could be specific to the portion that you have been looking at. But if a specific one doesn't come to you, it could be a more general response. In the breakout groups, you'll have a chance to get an overview of the concerns in the report of the working group from 2017. And to do a little bit of a report back for the rest of the group so that they hear Cole's Notes version of what your group looked at. And I hope you'll spend more of your time and focus on dreaming up some faithful responses as we begin the second decade. So your task, which in a little bit will also be put in the chat so that you have it, will be to read your assigned paragraphs, either individually or as a group. To share with one another your answers, your responses to that, or your reaction to that, briefly in what I'm calling one breath answer. And a one breath answer is something that if you have to take a breath in the middle of it, you've probably tried to say too much. It's just a really brief words, usually not even a full sentence, your feelings, just to give everybody a chance to kind of open the air with their initial responses. And it's almost like a very brief check-in. After each of you has shared, or all who wish to share have shared, and the first person that shares can invite the next person to share. And if you prefer not to share, you can just invite the next person. And after all who wish to share have shared, I ask you to pause for what I call a 3-breath pause. And everybody's 3 breaths is different, but that just gives you a little bit of a sense of how long you're pausing and brings you back to your breath. And then with the rest of the time, you're invited to prepare a very brief presentation. Again, privileging Black voices in the presentation. Did I say when you do the first sharing to make space for anyone who identifies as Black in the group to share first if they wish. So that is that's privileging Black voices. And so when you prepare to make a brief presentation, again, privilege Black voices while making space for all voices to share.